Welcome back to the Pig Trail Show. I'm Nick Petriccioni, joined by our Kevin McPherson, our Hogville Hoops insider, as we have a lot, Kevin, to break down. Unfortunately, Arkansas's March or NCAA tournament coming to an end, but it was a great run before that Duke loss. They beat Gonzaga, they beat New Mexico State, they beat Vermont on their way to a second straight Elite Eight appearance. This week we had Gonzaga and Duke. And let's break those two games down. Just how did you think the Hogs performed those last two matchups, starting with the Zags?
Well, first of all, Arkansas was the better team against Gonzaga. I think when you look at the number one rated offense in the country, the number one overall seed, the AP top ranked team, and Arkansas holds that team way below, 20 points below its season scoring average. When you look at the final score there, 74-68. Arkansas holds this team to around 36% field goal shooting, 36%, shooting 52% on the season. And even the three-point line, Arkansas held Gonzaga below its typical, top 25 team shooting from three. Arkansas holds it down there. I think the biggest thing when I look at that game in both halves is it was Arkansas's defense. We talk about it being the calling card all year. It really was. So Arkansas hung its hat there in that game. I thought established early on that things were not going to be easy for Gonzaga. Gonzaga is a team that plays with pace. I thought Arkansas did a really good job in transition. -3 at the end of the game in transition, but for a team that gets a lot up and down and really likes to move that ball, even off of makes, Arkansas being that close and holding Gonzaga to 17 points in transition, I thought was a big deal. And I think really when we start looking at individual performances, the key to that Gonzaga team really started in the middle with Drew Timme. Had a good game. You look at the 7-footer Chet Holmgren, who's going to be a lottery pick, ended up fouling out, played with some foul trouble. But I thought Jalen Williams, when you look at his performance, and guys like Trey Wade and Dees Tony and Stanley Amudi, all those guys, Devo Davis off the bench, you start looking at the defense individually. And Gonzaga was used to having, even though the two big men are kind of their centerpieces, a lot more success in the backcourt. Tony shuts down Nebhart, the point guard on that team that led the team, was a top assist guy in the country, one of the top assist guys, basically shut him down. He couldn't score. He couldn't shoot. His assist numbers were down. So I thought Tony did a great job there. And I thought Arkansas as a team, the defense was so good. So when you look at the percentages, when you look at individual performances, yeah, Timme had a big game. Two-time second-team All-American. You're not going to take everybody out, but I thought Arkansas basically put on a clinic defensively. And then you look offensively, Arkansas did just enough like it always does. I think Arkansas probably should have been at the foul line a little bit more. You win by 6. I think Arkansas, the leading the number one team in the country in free throws attempted per game, taking only 14 in that game, made 9, but 6 of 6 down the stretch when Gonzaga started basically fouling to stop the clock. So once again, Arkansas's clutch in those tight game situations. But I thought when you beat the number one team in the country in the NCAA tournament and you did it in the regular season, Arkansas becomes the only team in Division I history to do that. So that's a huge win. It gets Arkansas back to the Elite Eight, back-to-back seasons. Duke, just being honest, I think Duke was the better team. I thought Duke executed a smart game plan, drive the ball at Arkansas, don't settle for threes, because Duke was big on its front line. Paulo Banchero at 6'10", was very versatile, a guy that could put the ball on the deck, get to the baskets. Their guards were physical, quick. Thought did a great job of attacking. Having said all that, the fact that Arkansas against both Gonzaga and then Duke really had a hard time getting to the free throw line. Somehow it went from being one of the top teams because of the aggressive style, driving to the basket, really going in and seeking that contact. Somehow it went from being the top team in the country shooting free throws to barely being able to get into even a 1-on-1 situation. Didn't happen in the first half against Gonzaga. Only happened with a minute left in that Gonzaga game when they were fouling intentionally. And then against Duke, you don't get into the 1-on-1 until basically 2 minutes left in the first half. So I really think, I'm not saying that that's why Arkansas lost that Duke game, but I am saying that game maybe has a little bit different complexion. Arkansas was in double-digit deficits for the most part of that, for sure the second half, towards the end of the first half. And I think if it's a 6, 7, 8 point game and maybe that free throw line helps you be there, we've seen Arkansas game in and game out, even when it maybe didn't have the most talent, and maybe when there were reasons to think the other team had outplayed Arkansas in some areas, Arkansas finding ways when the game was a little closer to overcome some adversity and win. And I think that element was missing. I'm not blaming the refs, but I do think there were some missed calls in that game that maybe would have put Arkansas on the free throw line a little bit more. But again, Duke, I think, was the better team. Coach K, this guy's an icon. It's his final season. He now has 13 Final Fours. You know, that's the most. He was tied with John Wooden, the legendary UCLA coach. Now he owns that with a lot of other records he's got, winning as coach and a lot more. And 5 NCAA titles. But let's face it, Arkansas now is 2-2 against Duke. The previous time these teams met was in the 93-94 national championship team. Arkansas won that game for the only national championship in the basketball program. So Arkansas has done well against Duke. Didn't play its best game last night. I think a lot of that had to do with Duke, but I also think this Arkansas team, Nick, when I look at it, has nothing to be ashamed of. And I want to talk about, I hope we'll get into this, kind of a review of, kind of recap of the season sort of globally, and we'll pick out a few turning points early, middle of the season, and later on.
Yeah, Arkansas falling to Duke 78-69. I'm looking at the stats, 19 points for Jalen Williams and 10 rebounds, a double-double. J.D. Note and Stanley Amude both with 14 points in that loss. They reached their second consecutive Elite Eight appearance. They fall to Duke, and it's hard to beat Coach K in the last year. But you mentioned, this is an amazing season for Arkansas, and one that maybe at the start of SEC play did not look imaginable, especially when you started SEC play 0-3. All of a sudden, you're an Elite Eight team. You go back, even in non-conference, and you said this is not a season to be ashamed of. How do you wrap up this season for Arkansas now that a bow has been put on it?
It's one of the best seasons in the program's history, and it's a proud, storied history. Eric Musselman, what he's done the last 2 years, back-to-back Elite Eights, a final national top 10 ranking this year. I think when the coaches vote their final poll after the tournament, I think Arkansas might be back in that final top 10 again. You finished second in the SEC a year ago. You finished fourth technically this year. Really good in the top 4, by the way, in the SEC during the regular season. But when you combine the two seasons together, Arkansas is the winningest team in the SEC, both overall record and when you look at league games, that's regular season and SEC tournament, did the best job. If you look at postseason success, Arkansas went the deepest the last 2 seasons. In fact, this year, the SEC was a disappointment outside of Arkansas. The Hogs were the only team to advance past the first weekend. But let's break it down even more. Arkansas finishes 28-9. The 28 wins are the 6th most in a season in school history. I mentioned that this team beat number 1 both in the regular season and the NCAA tournament. Had never happened before. Arkansas was 3-1 against teams ranked in the AP top 10, 5-2 against teams ranked in the AP top 15. And then when I look at some of the other things defensively, we talked about how Arkansas really turned its season around. And it was on that end of the floor where Arkansas got markedly better. When you looked at SEC games, after that 0-3 start, when you put it all together, Arkansas in many categories was the best in the league defensively when you looked at efficiency and certain numbers. Kim Palm Analytics at the end of the season, with all games count figured in, has Arkansas as the 11th best defense when you look at efficiency. That's about right. That makes sense when we look at what played out. I talk about on offense, Arkansas and Kim Palm was 54th in the country. This was not a great offensive team. What it was really good at was figuring out weaknesses of teams, and any team's going to be susceptible if you continually attack the basket because you're going to get to the free throw line. I think that's where Arkansas got penalized a little bit when they played those higher seeds, Gonzaga and Duke, off what it's normally used to. If you think about, if you go back to the Olympics back in the day when they talked about the Eastern Bloc judges always having lower scores for competitors from the West, sometimes the officiating feels like that when you play against some of these blue bloods and top level teams because you're relying on those whistles to get to the free throw line and manufacture some of those points. So I'm not trying to be a homer and cry about it. What I'm saying is, logically, if you just look at it logically, Arkansas probably should have spent a little more time at the free throw line this weekend in Sweet 16 Elite Eight games, and I think it impacted. Let's go back to Arkansas's losses here when it won basically, 16 out of its last 20 games, or was it whatever the number is, Arkansas, the losses were games where it got back behind by double digits at Alabama, at Tennessee, Texas A&M, and then Duke. And so I think where last year's team was really good at overcoming double-digit deficits, led the country in those games where they came back from double digits to win, this team didn't quite have enough firepower offensively to do that. I think that's why when you look at some of those close call wins, and there were so many of them, when Arkansas trailed in those games, it was by 7, by 8. They didn't really fall behind far, and they didn't stay down for very long when they did. I think this team had a little harder time overcoming bigger deficits. And it's hard for anybody to overcome a double digit deficit, especially late in games. But I think this Arkansas team was special in several ways. And I think when you look at it individually, Nick, we can go through the top 5 or 6 rotation because all those guys deserve credit. But it starts with JD Note and Jalen Williams, who I think should be remembered now as all-time greats, even off the strength of this one season. Note, you go back to last year with a 6th man of the year in the SEC. Jalen Williams, a big role last year in Arkansas's turnaround. Had a turnaround last year too, about the same time, mid-January. So when you cobble those efforts together to help that team get to an Elite Eight off the strength of how good they were individually this year and the team success, these are now 2 of the all-time Hog greats. JD Note, a point shy of 2,000 in his career. If he doesn't come back to college, that's a shame. When you combine his 2 years at Jacksonville, 2 at Arkansas, score 1,000-point score at Arkansas in just 2 seasons. Top 2 in the SEC in scoring this year. Led the league in steals. And you look at Jalen Williams, a double-double machine, 16 this year. Really, that started when league play started. Became a double-figure score. So 16 double-doubles, 4 in every game in the NCAA tournament, which were huge. And then I look at the fact that he's the all-time single-season leader at Arkansas in rebounds and led the nation this year in charges drawn at 54. He's a unique rim protector. So I thought both of those guys were special. I thought guys like Tony and Moody were similar to Jalen Tate and Justin Smith last year. New guys, brand new guys, but veterans, brand new to Arkansas, veterans. And Eric Musselman figures out ways to get the best out of those guys and play to their strengths. And you look at Devo Davis, who I thought had a good NCAA tournament, preseason second team All SEC. Probably didn't have the kind of season, obviously, that he would have liked coming off a strong freshman season, but definitely showing that he's a guy that helped Arkansas get back to an Elite Eight. And I think when you look at Trey Wade, what a game he had against Gonzaga. Really helped Arkansas, I think, when Musselman figured out those pieces and moved him into the starting rotation. So a really good year for him as a senior and another grad transfer. But I just think Arkansas, when you look at the season, Nick, and you talk about the individual pieces, the team success, some of those wins. I mean, when you're beating teams like Kentucky, Gonzaga, Tennessee when it's strong, Auburn, who reached number 1 this year and has been good under Bruce Pearl. When you add all of that up, I don't see anything you can look back on other than losing 5 out of 6. We talked about that snag there. Maybe that's exactly what this team needed to get things righted, because when they played the best part of their schedule later on, they had things figured out and they won most of those games. We went through the record.
We'll see if who comes back and how this team looks in next year. They always say you can relive, and now it's time to retool. And this group is going to be very good moving forward, especially because of 2 names we're about to mention. That's Nick Smith Jr. and Jordan Walsh. And there's some big news. We all know these guys are Hogs by now. 2 top 10 guys, but there's a big game this week for these 2. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the McDonald's All-American game is Tuesday. It's the first time that it's the second time that Arkansas has had 2 McDonald's All-Americans in the same game as part of the same recruiting class. It happened with Todd Day and Lee Mayberry back in 1988, and those are 2 of the all-time greats, future NBA players, first-round picks, and, helped Arkansas have a lot of success on the court, Final Four, Elite Eight themselves. But back then they didn't have star rankings. So this is the first time Arkansas has gotten to 5 stars in the same class. They're McDonald's All-Americans. And they play that game. It's the most prestigious, really probably the most prestigious honor for high school players to make the McDonald's game, unless you're the National Player of the Year. But that's it. And that happens Tuesday. They've already started practicing today. They arrived in Chicago this weekend. Already had an NBA scout reach out to me. I have to keep this anonymous, telling me Nick Smith's the real deal. Another onlooker who's there, a lot of basketball knowledge, sent me a text also saying that Nick Smith's the best player there. I've seen some other guys that are covering it nationally that have said similar things. So already just in the practice session, Nick Smith standing out. And look, what do you expect? He's ranked consensus top 5 in the country. He's going to be in the Nike Hoop Summit, the Jordan Brand Classic. He was a Naismith first team All American in high school. So, he's starting to, he's always really shown it on the court against other top level, top shelf talent. But this weekend, I think, is going to be another example of that. Jordan Walsh, by the way, is no slouch. ESPN top 10 5-star. He'll be in the Powerade Jam Fest on Monday, which is a big deal. So he'll be in that dunk contest with some of the elite athletes. He's certainly one of them. But Jordan Walsh is another guy that I think Arkansas fans are going to love because he plays the right way. Both he and Nick Smith will bring a lot to the table for the Razorbacks. And they'll be on campus, by the way, Nick. You start talking late May, early June. That is right around the corner.
I can't wait.
Look, we know Eric Musselman's going to get back in that portal. We know there's going to be roster turnover. Who's nervous by that at this point? He remakes his roster at least halfway, and it's resulted with a mix of really good high school players, good grad transfers, and Note was a transfer who sat out a year and has been at Arkansas 2 years. But whatever the combinations are, the results are what matter. You can win in recruiting, but you better win on the court after that. Musselman's showing he can do that. So I think Nick Smith Jr. and Jordan Walsh are the centerpieces on a fine class. There's other players in that class. By the way, Darian Ford down here in Central Arkansas this weekend playing in the Mike Conley Jr. All-Star Classic, Team Arkansas versus Team Tennessee, and he had a good game, kind of did a lot. 13 points, but 8 rebounds, 8 assists, 6 steals in that game. And it's really for fun that, he showed some of the things that he can do at both ends of the court. So you're talking about a great class. Joseph Pinion, Barry Dunning Jr., Darian Ford and Dunning, back-to-back Gatorade Players of the Year in their states. Joseph Pinion, 6'6", going to be a sharpshooter. I think Arkansas's class right now, as it stands, ranked number 2 behind Duke. There's Duke again.
Yeah.
But we got some more big news potentially falling tomorrow. So I want to get into that as another 5-star is going to make an announcement.
We've been tracking this. I know you have especially, but this is a name that I've always now kept my eye on since you told me about him, Anthony Black, because I know before the Gonzaga matchup, that's a crew who's recruiting him as well. What can you tell us about this 5-star?
Well, for the longest time, I really didn't think Arkansas was in the top 3 for his college choices. He's also got pro opportunities with the G League, NBA G League. But I always felt Arkansas was 2 or 3 at best. And after that unofficial visit, which he officially visited back in the fall during football season, took an unofficial visit back in February for that Tennessee game when the Pro Hogs were back. And I really thought Arkansas turned a corner there. In fact, I thought for a few weeks after that Arkansas was probably in the lead. And I was getting that from folks inside on Arkansas side and some from the DFW area where he's from, Duncanville, Texas. In the last week or so, there's been a lot of talk and that leaning maybe Gonzaga is the leader now. And so right now I'm on the fence, honestly, going into it tomorrow on Monday. He's going to make his announcement. I do think it's down to Gonzaga and Arkansas. TCU's the hometown school. Great season for TCU. He's got connections with player and coach there, and that's his hometown. So that might be the dark horse. Keep an eye on that. But I do think it's probably down to Arkansas and Gonzaga. And I'm on the fence. I'm going to say 50-50. I just don't know. But there's been a lot of Gonzaga smoke, and a lot of times when there's smoke, you got to kind of pay attention to it. But I'll say this, when Jordan Walsh made his announcement, a couple of days leading up to that, there was a lot of talk about from coming out of Texas that Texas was going to get him and Arkansas wasn't. And we saw how that played out. And he's signed, sealed, and delivered. So we'll see what happens with Anthony Black, but it's going to be exciting for Hog fans. We just talked about Duke having the number 1 class, Arkansas number 2 right now. You get Anthony Black, you've got even more bragging rights. And you're battling Gonzaga again, like we just talked about. So this weekend, Sweet 16, Elite 8 games against teams that Arkansas is also competing with when you talk about recruiting rankings and players. And it's good to be competing with those teams, right?
Yeah,
if you're at the wire with those two, that's good company.
And with the Elite 8, I remember when we talked with Tony and Amude and all these guys, Jackson Robinson, even before the season, it's like that Elite 8 run was, I want to come here because this team can win. And another Elite 8 run with you mentioned there's going to be some gaps that needed to be filled by the transfer portal. Only going to help this team what just happened. Even after the loss to Duke, people are going to say, wow, Arkansas, they've done it back-to-back years. It's a program that, hey, let's make it 3. I want to go to Arkansas. and try and build a legacy, maybe get farther.
And I think those things snowball for each other. If you're selling this as a coach recruiting, you're saying, look, high school player, we did this with our guys that we recruited out of high school. And look here, grad transfer, we did this because we had big roles in the rotation for guys that came in just a year having played somewhere else. We can acclimate you and get you in these situations to get you better as a player, get you better as a player for the next level, because that's where most of our staff has been, or a good part of it. And you're going to have the exposure of advancing in a tournament. So you're showing them reasons why, like you said, you're really making that point. I'm just saying, I think that it's one thing to say we're having success, but you show players why they can identify with that success. Jalen Tate, Justin Smith, Stanley Amudi, Otis Tony. Those are great prime examples if you're recruiting that transfer portal. By the way, Arkansas is having some, is in on some of the top guys. They identify these guys quickly. So even though they've been busy, they've been hitting that part of it too. But I just think it's interesting, the dynamic, because a lot of teams succeed in recruiting and not necessarily translate that and get carries over to the court. You see some teams that have, better success on the court, and they maybe aren't able to parlay that into the top, among the top teams in recruiting. Arkansas seems to be connecting both right now. And I think that's why Eric Musselman, it's like, write a blank check. What's he going to do next year? I think Arkansas is going to be in great shape to make another run similar to the last 2 years and potentially further.
They're built for it. And wow, I cannot wait for the news of this week. Monday, potential Anthony Black. Where's he going to go? Tuesday, McDonald's All-American. A lot of Arkansas work left to be done for Eric Musselman now that the season is over. Kevin McPherson, thank you so much for joining us on our Hogs Hoop Report. We got more Pig Trail Show coming up after the break.